You please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to thank all of you folks for coming. Our Chairman, Sean Williams, is not here this evening, so I am the Vice Chair, and I'll be substituting for him this evening. If it doesn't go quite smoothly, I only get to do this once or twice a year, so please bear with me, and I'm sure staff will make any corrections or call on me if something doesn't go quite right. All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out the oath card to be heard on the agenda item and sign the oath contained therein. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber and may be obtained by the recording secretary. This meeting may be conducted in accordance with procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first. Those opposed will be heard second. And those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Anyone here on the commission visited any of the sites or spoken to anyone about items on the agenda? No. Okay, so we will start. Staff?
We need roll call.
We need roll call.
That's all right. Chairman Williams.
I told you.
Chairman Williams. Vice Chairman Shavir.
Here.
Secretary Chambers. Dr. Faison.
Yes.
Member Baker. Member Ritchie. Member Bobick. Member Noel Copeland. Here. School Board Member Hare. Here.
We have a quorum, so therefore we can conduct business.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, it's Dr. Faison.
I see an item here that most people may or may not be here for. I'd like to offer a motion to move C to A and A to C.
What page are you on, please?
I'm on the second page of the agenda.
And you wish to do what, sir?
I wish to move C to A and A to C.
Mr. Chairman, you may want to poll the audience with a show of hands to ask what the item is that the people are here for by asking by letter of the agenda. The letter A is the ordinance relating to shipping containers as an accessory structure, and letter C is the moratorium extension for medical marijuana dispensaries.
Thank you.
Okay, let it remain. I don't see any.
If you'd like to have a show of hands, I wasn't looking to see if they did so as I looked.
I only saw one hand go up for the. Oh, this is A. Okay, let it remain.
I think the A's have it.
Let it remain, Chair.
I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. All right, we're going to proceed here. Just a minute. Staff?
I am going to introduce myself because I don't come here very often, unfortunately. I'm Peggy Busaka, the Community Development Director, and the first item tonight is the ordinance relating to shipping containers utilized as accessory structures. On August 22nd, 2017, Council approved advisability to regulate the use of shipping containers as accessory structures in residential areas. The city's land development regulations currently do not specifically discuss the use of shipping containers as accessory structures. Within the last several years, the use of shipping containers as accessory structures used permanently on a site we've seen that they're being used increasingly often in residential areas. There are two things that we want you to remember as we discuss this. The first is that the building code requires structures over 120 square feet to obtain a building permit. Sometimes these shipping containers can be as large as 9 by 40, so they are in excess of this 120 square feet. In addition to that, if an accessory structure is greater than 20% of the square footage of the principal structure, it is required to be architecturally compatible. The proposed ordinance would prohibit the placement of any shipping container as an accessory building within the residential area, or as a storage building or as an accessory living unit on either residentially zoned or residentially utilized property. Licensed contractors may continue to use shipping containers for temporary housing of equipment and materials during construction as authorized by a city building permit. I have provided to you a change in the ordinance that was sent to you this morning, but I want to go over those changes which relate to page 5 of 6 of the ordinance, and it relates to the nonconforming structure section. What this section says is that in the event that one of these shipping containers, which is currently on residentially zoned or residentially used property, has received a building permit and the permit either remains valid or has had a final inspection as of the date of this regulation, that it shall continue. Sure. Can I give? Yes, sir. I'd be happy to give you one. Okay, thank you. That in the event that these shipping containers have either received a building permit and that it remains valid, or they have received final inspection, that they would be allowed to continue for a period of 3 years, after which time they must be removed. Now, this is typically nonconforming uses, and that is defined as a use which was legal at the time that it was installed and then the code changed. Normally, those are allowed to continue in perpetuity until they either no longer are being used as they were or they are destroyed beyond 50%. So this is more restrictive than is usually done for nonconforming structures. And what we have talked about is how did we come up with this 3 years? So I want to explain that. What I did was I took the cost of and I just used a 10 by 40. I took the cost of a 10 by 40 shipping container. You would have to think about, you'd have to purchase the shipping container. You would have to have the shipping container placed on your property after it has been transported to the property. And then you would have to have the cost of actually putting some kind of tie downs or something so that it met the building code. And what I looked at was on the internet, I saw that you can purchase shipping containers everywhere from one trip, which they consider brand new, to very old and having gone across the ocean many times. And the difference, those can cost, and I took the most expensive shipping container. You can purchase one for about $2,000. I'm sorry, like new would be anywhere between $5,000 and $8,000. I took the cost of that. I added the cost of delivery, which for a 40-foot shipping container is about $780. The crane that would have to be used to place it costs about $700. And so I estimated that the shipping container would be a total of, I'm sorry, I misspoke one thing. The cost of the container is about $6,500. But if you add the cost of the container, the cost of the crane, and the cost of delivery, it's about $8,000 for a cost. Now, if I were to take and rent what is the most expensive unit I could find in Brevard County, that would be equivalent to 140 by 9-foot shipping container, which is 4 10 by 10 mini storage units, that would cost about $8,690 a year. So in approximately, and somewhere less than 2 years, the person could have gotten the value of that shipping container as compared to the value of rental. Then, because we wanted to be as conservative as possible, we added an additional year to that, and that's how we got to 3 years. Then, after we had started talking about this, we had an opportunity to speak with some people who were interested because they lived next door to one of these shipping containers. And there was some discussion about whether or not the shipping container could remain if they looked architecturally compatible. So the paragraph C under nonconforming is trying to address that issue. And what it says is that if you do not want to, if you just want to leave your shipping container as it is, it has to be off in 3 years after this ordinance. The other alternative is that you could get a permit and make it architecturally compatible within 6 months. That means it would have to have some kind of siding on it, a pitched roof, and be painted consistent with the primary residential structure. Now, these would look very similar to a shed, which I could go and purchase from Walmart online for about $3,000. I did my research, and you can get a shed that is 9 by 36 with a pitched roof from Walmart for $3,000. The other alternative is that you could put some kind of materials, which would probably be vegetative because they would have to be taller than a fence would be permitted, in such a way that the neighbors couldn't see the structure from the property line. If that were the case, then these structures would be permitted to remain past the 3 years. Now, the next question I'm sure that you have is, how many of these do we have throughout the city? We have identified 3 of these where permits have been issued, and one in which permits have been issued and they are either have been finalized or they are waiting within the period that the permit is still active for their final inspection. An additional permit has been issued for a 4th. However, the permit has expired, and code enforcement will now be speaking to the property owner about removing it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and I'm sure our attorney would be happy to discuss this nonconforming issue in greater detail.
I have a question for staff. If somebody has one of these, none of these have been upgraded, is that correct? That you're aware of?
I'm aware of one that has been painted to be consistent with the color of the house.
But other than that?
To the best of my knowledge and from the pictures that I've seen, they have not been upgraded. That's correct. Are you aware of anything different than that?
I don't know any different.
You indicated that there exists just 3 in the city of Titusville?
That we're aware of, yeah, that we can identify through the permitting software we have.
Now, commercially?
No, sir, these are just on residential.
This is just residential?
Yes, sir. We're not talking, this would not affect any commercial activity. This is simply on residential property.
Okay.
The 3 that are in existence, how long have they been on the properties?
One of them has been there since, two of them have been there since 2015. One has been there since 2017.
So that's a new one.
And these are basically used for storage.
Yes, sir.
So in the case of these three, what happens here now that, I mean, they've had them for a couple of years. Where do we go from here?
Under the language that I provided to you, all of them would be able to be in existence. Let me speak more clearly. The two that have passed their final inspection would be allowed to stay for 3 years from the effective date of this ordinance, which is scheduled to be next Tuesday. The third would have to have their final permit, which that inspection date should come up next month. They've had the permit for 5 months now. Then that would be permitted to stay for 3 years, unless, under the language provided to you, they were to make it architecturally compatible or not visible from the property lines, at which point they could stay permanently.
Within 6 months from the ordinance.
I'm sorry, yes, they would have to make those changes within 6 months of the ordinance.
So if they do nothing, what happens?
If they do nothing and the two that the permit has been finalized, then 3 years from the effective date of this ordinance, we would be telling them that they needed to remove the shipping container. The one that the permit has not yet had the inspection, that one, if the inspection is done, then 3 years from the effective date of this ordinance, they would be removed. If the inspection was not done, then code enforcement would go out and say, your building permit has expired, you need to remove it immediately.
So the maximum that we're at here is 3 years.
Yes, unless it under the language in paragraph C, they were brought into compliance with the architectural requirements or they were screened from view.
What size lots are these on, generally speaking?
I think a typical quarter-acre lot or smaller. There's
a 2-acre lot.
Oh, there is one of them that's a 2-acre lot that I'd forgotten. Of the three, there's one that's a 2-acre lot.
Is there anything they can do to extend the 3-year term?
Under the way it is written right now, no. Now, you know, that's your ability to recommend whatever you'd like to see, but that's the way it's written right now.
One thing that I would like to add as far as the nonconforming policy that is being proposed by this language is that the council is making a determination here that this is something that they deem unsightly and unacceptable in the city. And you would find that statement in the legislative findings of this ordinance, the second to last whereas clause says that the improper use and location, I'll let you flip to the first page of the ordinance that was provided. The improper use and location of shipping containers can be unsightly, dangerous, and inappropriate so as to affect property values, enjoyment of property, and the overall health, safety, and welfare of residential property owners within the city of Titusville. That's the basis that the council will be making this policy decision, that 3 years is the amortization period for these shipping containers that have been permitted. And the reason that Peggy went through the cost analysis is because we configured the cost that the owner may have spent and what is their investment-backed expectation for what they have spent on the property that they've improved. And the things that they can do in order to keep that value would be either to have it hidden from view or to make it architecturally compatible, which we understand is an additional expense.
You said that if they went to Lowe's and bought a shed that was, I think you said 9 by 36, that just seems more feasible, especially as far as cost and looks go.
Well, I think what I was telling you is the comparative cost of a new shipping container. which has the least amount of dents and the smallest amount of rust. In
So
the
they may buy a older one that
correct, which the
looks
cost would go
rusty
down
and-
significantly. Yes, ma'am.
So,
And the metal shipping containers that you would buy, that would still have that noisy metal door that would
Yeah.
close. That
Right.
would still, that would still be a shipping container. So that's why the concern is we have an industrial type structure in a residential neighborhood.
right. Well, do you know the cost of like the older ones that are in bad shape?
According to my research, you could get a shipping container for probably as little as $1,500, maybe even less. Because we are close to the port, the cost to move it could be substantially lower than the $780 that I quoted. It's really $2.6 a mile. We're not that far from the port, so that could be significantly less. And again, one of the reasons that we're seeing so many of these shipping containers is because right now the length of the largest ones are about 40 feet. They are actually getting longer to 53 feet. So people are offloading the shorter ones because, these these ships are getting bigger these days. So it's possible that as more people get rid of these 40-foot and smaller, the price will go down significantly.
Are the people that are getting these using them just for temporary storage? Are any of them wanting to make them a permanent
Yes, ma'am. The
structure?
3 we give them where they have the building permit, those are definitely intended by the owner to be permanent.
So if this is accepted, they would have to remove it after 3 years?
Yes, ma'am, unless they make it architecturally compatible or not
Right.
visible. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Any other questions from staff?
Yes. What do you mean when you indicate hidden?
Well, what that would mean to me is that it would have to be, if I'm standing on the ground on the property line, that I'm looking at bushes, trees, something so that I can't see that. And that would be, from my perspective, all the property lines.
And of course, from the street?
Yes, sir, and from the street as well.
Any other questions? Do we have any folks out here with green card on this?
Yes, we have several.
Okay.
Dennis Daly.
Good evening. I'm Dennis Daly. I live at 5080 Winchester Drive in Titusville. I would like to express my support for this ordinance. I'm very familiar. I walk by every day one of the locations in our community, and it is rather unsightly, and it's detrimental to the overall property values, I think, of the community. I applaud your conservatism in establishing the 3-year time limit. That's the one thing I think I object to in the ordinance as written, is the 3-year grandfathering. I think that's really excessive, considering the unsightly nature of these containers. So, for what it's worth, I do object to that particular language. But I applaud the Commission for taking this up and keeping our communities very in a very orderly fashion, and this doesn't really, the shipping containers don't really give us that order and keep our communities looking the way we would like them to. Thank you.
Tom Furstrom.
Tom Fernstrom, 4875 Winchester Drive. And this is visible, well, the property visible from my house. And by code, a shipping container that size is not permitted on a lot that size. A shipping container that size would go on an acre or bigger. These are less than a half acre. Pardon? The 9 by 40 that is on this property presently. The one I'm speaking about is 2800 St. Mark's Drive. And, you know, we want to work with the city. We want to work with the people to reach a compromise. But the way this is worded, and like Ms. Basaka confirmed it, that this will be allowed to stay as is for 3 years. And that's not going to work for us. Because, as Mr. Daly just pointed out, it's unsightly, it's an eyesore, it's too big for the lot. I have a 12 by 24 shed, factory built, that cost me $4,700 installed. So this thing's not a lot bigger than that. And our suggestion is, if they will take this within 6 months, not 3 years, if they will do the siding, do a little A-roof, then we don't have a problem with it. Make it look like a building. Make it look like a shed. Within 6 months, not 3 years. And I think that's fair. I know what this one costs. According to the building permit, this one costs $2,400. And I don't know what the, you know, transporting it. They brought it in on a tractor trailer with a dump bed, and they just rolled it off in the yard, which is typically how most of them are put in a place like that. So the cost is not as high as you might think. And they don't need 3 years to recover that. And you know, we have, most all of these people here are opposed to that. And we will be at the city council meeting, probably with more people. So, you know, this is our compromise. If they can do it within 6 months, and, you know, if the city does give them an extension of 3 months, we can live with that. But 3 years is way out there. Thank you.
But 6 months to come into compliance, the language does include the fact that if there's some kind of hardship, let's say we're in the middle of a hurricane season, you could get up to an additional 60 days, but that would have to be, a hardship would have to be shown. But basically 6 months to make it look compatible.
But we're not talking about the 6 months within the 3 years. We're talking about 6 months from the time this ordinance is enacted. That's why we object so strongly to the allowance of 3 years in our particular case. Now, with the others that have been permanently permitted and been there for 2 or 3 years, that's a different story. But ours is not the same as the others.
If I could, what Mr. Fernstrom is saying in the case of the property next door to him, they're the one that had the permit issued 5 months ago, and the permit has not been finalized. So there's the potential that 1 month from now, the permit expires, and then we would ask, code enforcement would go out and ask this person to remove it entirely, and that 3 years would not even be a debate at that time. But we won't know that until they get through their 6 month from the issuance of the permit.
That is correct, but we don't want to be in that position. I mean, this is not a good thing for our neighborhood. Our homes are selling in the 250 range. You know what's going to happen to them with something like this? You know, and as I've expressed before, I don't think that any of the council members or any of you would want one in your neighborhood, as they are. And so we're trying to be fair. We're not trying to be hard-nosed about it. We just want a fair compromise here. And to us, 6 months is more than fair to let them get it in compliance, or if they get a 60-day extension, that's okay, but not give them a 3-year time frame. That's all we're asking.
Now, in the meantime, if they were to hide it, you know, shrubbery and whatever else that
Well,
is
let me
recommended.
tell you let me tell you what can happen. If by chance they decide to sell a property, they may have a tough time if it's not made architecturally compatible with the siding and with the roof. As it is, most buyers aren't going to touch it. And this is what we're dealing with. When buyers come into our neighborhood and they see that, they're going, if they have these things, we don't want to live in here. I mean, this is.
But I think his question is, how would you feel if they put up a fence or shrubs or something that hid it from the street? Was that your question?
Yes.
That's an interesting question. If I didn't see it personally, it wouldn't bother me. But it'll still hurt the property values in our neighborhood. There are two neighbors that live directly across the street from it, and neither one of them are thrilled about it. I get telephone calls and emails.
But if they came into compliance here, then you wouldn't be able to see it from any of
Yeah.
the street views.
Well, it would take years to put something up there before it would be hidden by any kind of shrubbery or anything. This thing's 9 feet tall.
I understand, but this is written saying that it has to be hidden within a certain amount of time.
That's right.
Yeah.
They would have to plant very large trees or very quick.
Or a fence.
Well, a fence can only be 6 feet high.
So that won't do it.
So
Okay.
that won't do it.
I got you.
And then one other thing, and that it also says that should the property be sold and change ownership, that the shipping container must be removed within 60 days.
Oh, what you're saying is that each property owner of that property would have to go through the process of the one who has it presently.
No, sir. What I'm saying is that I have a shipping container which I have left there for 3 years. Let's say I've left it there for 1 year. I've not made it architecturally consistent, and I've not hidden it from view. I sell the house. Within 60 days, the new owner has to remove that.
Okay.
Or bring it into compliance.
No, ma'am.
Oh, they
What
have to
this
remove
would
it
say
altogether.
is that if you don't bring it into compliance within 6 months after the effective date of this ordinance, then it's gone, and the end of 3 years. Because what we didn't want to do was to set up an opportunity for someone to live beside it as it ugly for 3 years, at the last minute, make it consistent. We wanted you to make it consistent, make it look good now, or just know that 3 years is, you're done. That's how we saw it. Well, because it just seemed like the worst of all possible worlds, that you were going to have to live beside it for 3 years, and then somebody still had the right to make it architecturally consistent. But you may see it differently, but that's how we thought about it.
So you're permitted for 3 years. Once
then
you
it's
come
gone.
in, and
Then
the
it's
next
gone.
person can come in and get it permitted for 3 years.
No, after this, no new ones. That's the point of this ordinance. There will be no new shipping containers used in residential neighborhoods as accessory structures.
So this ordinance is to cover the 4 existing. That's it.
The 4 existing, and make sure this doesn't happen again.
Okay, accessory structures.
That's right. You cannot use a shipping container as an accessory structure in residential.
Well, what is permitted in accessory structures?
Well, a pool is an accessory structure, a shed is an accessory structure, but it would have to be a shed that was pre-manufactured as a shed or built as a shed, not a shipping container turned into a shed.
This was my argument right from day one. I've been involved with this thing from the day it was put there. And my argument was, because they permitted it under Section 391, which is so vague, you could literally back an old school bus into your yard, take the wheels off it, and have it permitted as a shed. And they all agreed, yeah, you can. Well, the other section that code enforcement cited this particular one under is Section 373. That deals with these things. And they're not allowed, they're designed to be temporary structures. They're not buildings, they're not designed to be buildings. They are what they are, and they're not permitted under that section. And this has been my argument. And like I said, the compromise we would like to see is if these folks want to keep it, then if they can bring it into compliance in 6 months or 8 months, if they get an extension, then it's not an issue. But 3 years is way out there, far beyond anything that's reasonable when you look at all of the circumstances. And that would take care of the issue for us. You know, we don't want to get into a lawsuit and all that stuff, but if we're pushed into it, that's where it'll go.
Thank you. I have a question for staff. If at the end of the term and their permit has expired, they've been notified that they have to remove the container, what happens at that point? I mean, who? I'm sure that the people who own it, have rented it, must pay for the removal of it. What happens if such compliance doesn't take place?
It's a code enforcement issue. And then the code board would determine if there had been a violation, and then they would be able to fine them on a daily basis for that.
Okay, thank you.
I need some clarification. Once the ordinance is put into effect, they have 6 months to bring it into architecturally compatible to the house. If they don't do it, they still have the 3 years, correct?
Yes.
And if they do it, they can keep it permanently.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
But they can keep it for 3 years if it's not. That seems excessive to me.
If you think that there's a shorter time frame that's more appropriate for
Right.
the amortization, such as 2 years, that could be part of your amendment and recommendation to council.
I have a question for staff. The original, when these folks brought these containers on their property, they were not given any time frame for removal. It just, how did this come about where these folks wind up with these containers for several years? And
I can tell you what I know, and I don't think I know everything. When someone would call and there's a container that is sitting in someone's driveway, then code enforcement would go out and say, you have 30 days because this is a temporary structure that you're using to fill up while your house is being sold or whatever. And so code enforcement, if that 30 days did not, if they was not removed within that 30-day period, code enforcement would move forward with code action. In the case of at least 3 that we're aware of, people didn't want to use them as temporary structures. They came into the building department and said, we want to use these as permanent structures. The building code says if you have a structure which is over 120 square feet, you want to use it as a permanent structure, you have to come in and get a building permit. So what we have is 2 different ways to come into the process, and unfortunately, it depended on whether you wanted to use them temporarily or permanently. And what we're trying to do now is to say that these structures are industrial in nature and should not be permitted on residential property, to kind of stop that ability to come in for the permanent use.
And the building permits that they got when they came in and got that, do those expire, or those?
This is the way the building permit works, is once it's issued, you have 6 months to get a inspection to prove that you've met the requirements of the building permit.
Okay.
Once that is finalized, then the building permit does expire, but now you don't need a building permit anymore because you've built the structure. You've met the requirements. It's rather like when you get a driver's license and you're getting a learning permit. Mm-hmm. Your learning permit expires once you get your real permit because you don't need a learning permit anymore. So a building permit expires once the requirements have been met.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any requirements in terms of the size of a container that someone may bring onto a property for whether it's permanent or temporary? Is there anything in the code that says, that would restrict the size of the container?
Temporary storage permits do have a maximum size of 8 feet wide, 24 feet long, and 9 feet high.
And that's what's in the code today.
Yes, sir.
So if somebody came into you now and wanted to put one of these containers on their property, you would deny them the permit to do so?
No, sir. If they wanted to get a temporary permit, if they wanted to use these temporarily, I'm selling my house and I want to take all my stuff and put it into a pod. It's a temporary use. I'm allowed to keep it for 30 days. The maximum size is as I've just described. Once I fill it up, I cart it away, we're done. So that's how the temporary structures work. As I said, several people have said, I don't want this temporarily. I want this permanently in my yard. And rather than going to Lowe's and buying a shed, they have taken these industrial and they've put them in their backyard and they've come for a building permit.
Was there anything in the code prior to that in terms of size?
The only thing that it says, that the code says about detached accessory structures is that once you've gotten to 20% of the size of the primary structure, it has to be architecturally consistent. Now, we had one gentleman come to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment said, on this instance, once you've got it painted the same color, it's architecturally consistent. So that one, which is one of the three that I talked to you about, is sitting there on a 2-acre lot with 2 other types of structures that has been painted the same color. The staff feels that that is inadequate, especially in these small lots, and we feel that the only way you could make compatibility is not just paint. You have to cover the side so it doesn't look like a structure, and you have to put a roof on it.
Mr. Chairman, there are additional cards to be heard, and if you would like to continue with the public comment, then there may be additional questions of staff at that time.
Thank you.
Sean Greenweek.
Hello, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. My name is Sean Greenwell. I live at 4970 Winchester Drive. I've lived in Cathedral Pines Estates for 30 years. I'm the president of the Phase 2 Homeowners Association and represent 52 of the homeowners that are in this rather large subdivision. Just to make sure we frame it up correctly, the current homeowner that we're most concerned about that happens to be in our neighborhood is not just in an isolated place in Tom's backyard. He lives on the main thoroughfare into the neighborhood. Not that that needs to weigh in your mind one way or another, but everybody that comes into that neighborhood every single day drives by the shipping container and currently has to see it because of the way that it was currently permitted. So I certainly am in favor of putting some sort of restriction. I think that is a sensible thing to go do. I think with the propensity of folks to be able to go out and buy shipping containers, this is going to be a problem that this city and probably most cities we're going to have to deal with at one time or another. They're relatively inexpensive. They're hugely plentiful. They're very easy to go find. So getting ahead of the situation is certainly appreciated. A few things I would like to comment on within the proposed wording in Section 34, 353. Like Tom mentioned, I do believe that the current expectations of the 3 years for the presently permitted structures seems to be excessive. I appreciate Ms. Busacca going out and attempting to do some sort of rationalization of what the expense is. It's very easy to go do. These containers are available on Craigslist, and when I talk to some gentlemen that are willing to go sell them, the only thing that they represented to me was, do you want one that leaks and is rusty, or do you want one that doesn't leak? That's what makes your determination. I can get an old beat-up one for $1,000, or I can get a sealed one with workable doors that's not rusty for $2,000. The only constraint was I can't get it delivered before the end of Christmas because they're all currently at Lowe's or Home Depot or sitting in a Walmart being used for storing their Christmas stuff. So he said, come see me as soon as Christmas is over. I said, hey, where do I have to go for them? He said, come see me in Opopka. That's where I deliver them at, right down the road. So for a non-leaking one, It's only $2,000. It doesn't have to be rolled off and supported with a crane, like Tom said. It's rolled off of a flatbed truck. I said, how much for delivery? He said, what zip code? 39780, $280. Will you pull it onto my lot and dump it on my lot where I want it for $280? Yes. So somewhere around $2,300, I can actually get one of these delivered. So if the basis of the 3 years is based on $8,000 in the compensation, I would only ask you to go back and consider that there may be some alternative numbers that you might want to take a look at to go shorten that time. Because as Tom said, it does seem like it's a little bit excessive. A couple other things I'd like to comment on, if I can. I would like to understand, excuse me. Yes, ma'am.
The chairman's running a clock for public comment here.
Okay. I would like to understand the terminology used in C and alternatively. It seems to me like that is not an alternative statement. That is an in addition statement. If you're leaving it, you got to go do something to make it architecturally consistent. So I don't understand exactly how the city uses those words, but I believe that's actually in addition. If you're keeping it and this person elects to keep it, it should be there and be architecturally consistent. And then I would also mention farther down, it says compatibility shall include. That should be a must. Shalls and must statements and should statements are all requirements wording, but if you really want to enforce a requirement, it needs to say must. Because shalls you can get out of. Shall mean I will attempt to the best of my ability. Whereas I think what we're saying is if you're going to keep it, it must be architecturally consistent. So I would ask you to go consider those things. The time period does seem excessive to me, and I think there's some better wording in here. But I do appreciate the consideration. I think it is moving in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Al Taylor.
Good evening. Al Taylor, 2820 St. Charles Court, Titusville, Florida, 32780. I am for the ordinance as opposed to having shipping containers in residential neighborhoods. I am, as Thomas said, against the 3 years. I do think that is excessive. Now, I will relay that I am a member of the Planning Board of Adjustments and Appeals. And yes, we did approve a shipping container that came before us, but it was on a very large lot on Dairy Road that did not have a homeowner association or any residential neighborhood. It was in the back of the lot. It was shielded and by trees, and they had permission from the neighbors when they came before us. So yes, if you say President, yes, Board of Adjustments and Appeals did approve one. Yes, we did, but they were special circumstances. I don't see this case in any of our homes or Royal Oak, anywhere else, having lots big enough for a 9x40 structure to be in. It's one thing to have personal storage, but when you're also running a business out of that thing, which is not part of this venue, but that is being what's done with this. This is being used for commercial purposes. So we have no control over that. So I am for the ordinance not having these containers in yards. I have a 12x16 shed in my backyard. It's not visible from the street. You don't see my pool, you don't see my shed, and I don't even have side fences from the front yard. So there are things that can be hidden, but you can't hide a 9x20 or 9x40. It's just too big. So I would ask that you approve the ordinance, but the 3 years we like the compromise of 6 months much better. Thank you.
Al,
Yes. Yes, sir.
are you saying that the trailer presently, or the storage presently, is being used for commercial purposes?
The gentleman runs evidently a home business, and he stores all his supplies in it, and he has employees that park there during the day. There's as many as 7 or 8 cars at times, would you say? In the yard. Again, that's a different division. Code enforcement would have to do something about that, but
it'd be one thing if he's storing his own personal Model Ts or a boat or something like that in the backyard. This particular gentleman is not doing that. So just thought you might want to be aware of what the circumstances are for this particular property. Thank you.
Kristen Thomas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen. I think I'm supposed to give my address, 2575 Chesterfield Court. I do have some things I'd like to submit, just so y'all can kind of look and see my visual aids with me. So let me do that. I'm sorry? Would you like me to get that? I can just, okay. This is for the official. And there are some extras if you want to grab. There's definitely extras up there. Okay, so I am against the ban. Essentially, I believe that a complete ban is an aggressive and severe move from what I could tell must be a political reason. Everyone's here complaining about one person. It, to me, seems really crazy to completely eliminate and take away options for an entire city because people from one neighborhood are upset. There's HOAs all over the place, and typically people move into neighborhoods specifically because they want to live under the regulations of HOAs, and there are people that stay away from specific neighborhoods because they don't want HOAs. Now, to look at our visual aids, your first whereas statement in this report that Peggy had submitted, your second whereas statement actually talks about how tall they are and how they many times exceed fence height in residential areas by up to 40%. Well, this visual aid that I passed out to y'all, your standard shipping container is 8 foot tall. The shortest shed that I found at Lowe's is 8.5 foot tall. The tallest shipping container is only 9.5 foot tall. And on this example, 2 of these sheds from Lowe's are over 11 foot tall. So in other words, picture number 4 exceeds the fence height by 100%. And your second whereas statement here is complaining about a 40-foot exceeding a fence by an 8-foot shipping container. So the whereas statement there makes no sense. It seems to me that we have aesthetic issues that we have people that have problems with. That needs to be handled by an HOA. It's an extremely aggressive and severe action to completely ban all, and let's face it, because all a shipping container is a steel modular unit. I used to live in a house that was built. It was a modular wooden house. All a shipping container is a steel modular unit. The second picture that I gave to y'all, I know my time's running out. The second picture I gave to y'all, I actually took from my own backyard. This structure is 10.5 feet tall, up to 11 feet tall. The tallest shipping container is only 9.5 feet tall. None of these sheds here or that I could see from my backyard are architecturally compatible with the main house. So this just seems like a very severe, very aggressive, and honestly political ban. And there are ways that the building department can take care. There are codes in place. There are zones in place. There are things in place to take care of safety issues. I don't think there needs to be a complete ban. Thank you.
I think the problem is aesthetically, the units are aesthetically unpleasing to the majority of people that live in residential areas. They are giving them the opportunity to bring them to where they are aesthetically pleasing to the property owners, and I believe that they're addressing that situation. But to have an industrial unit like that that's going to have the possibility of leaking and is not constructed the repairs that on an industrial unit, such as a shipping container, would be, you'd have to have somebody come in and do welding and different types of repairs of that sort. And I don't think a shipping container is the proper use of a storage unit for residential properties. They're aesthetically eyesores. I mean, I believe they're aesthetically unpleasing to most people. But if they bring them up to where they need to be, like Ms. Pasaka said, and make it aesthetically pleasing, I think that would be acceptable.
But that's only for the 3 existing.
Right.
What she's saying is that this bans all future ones,
Right.
even if they wanted to bring them aesthetically up to
Right.
something that's pleasing.
Right, I
Is that
understand
your
that.
issue?
Yes, exactly,
Is it
exactly.
Not just talking
You're,
about
you're
these 3,
completely
it's talking about all
eliminating
future.
any opportunity for anyone in the future to ever use. And I guess ultimately, seems to me like it might open the city up for a lawsuit, because what's the difference between, all a shipping container is a steel modular unit. That's all it is. So what's the difference if I build my shed with this steel modular unit or a different steel frame unit? A steel frame is a steel frame versus wood frame versus the shed in my backyard is plastic. Certainly, even probably a terrible modular unit is going to be better than the plastic shed I have in my backyard.
Hold on, I have a question for staff. If somebody, now, I'm not talking about a 40-foot container, okay? I'm talking about let's say, 20-foot container. If you had a 20-foot container, and what would it take to bring that container to conformity? Would you have to put a new roof on it, make it aesthetically pleasing? In other words, so it would not have to look like a container. In other words,
Under the language of that is proposed, it would have to have a roof, would have to have siding.
Is this for future, or is this just for the ones that we're talking about that are currently installed?
The question was, how do you make a shipping container look aesthetically pleasing under the proposed?
to bring it into conformity
Right.
with
this.
With this,
It
right.
would have to be painted the same color as the house. It would have to be, have some kind of siding on it so that it wouldn't look like a shipping container. And it would have to have a pitched roof.
And this applies to residential property where there's a property that has a valid current building permit as of the effective date of this ordinance.
And of course, it would have to meet the setback standards of
Yes, of
every
course,
lot.
all those, yes.
Okay,
But-
so there you are. You have that. Now, we're not talking about, what would be the maximum size that we would have for this type of?
Mr. Shavir, Ms. Thomas is right. This ordinance would prohibit any future shipping containers used, whether it looked architecturally compatible or not. The point is, somebody said, I want to put a shipping container on my property. The building department would say, you may use it for 30 days as a temporary structure. You may not use it as a permanent structure. So there would not be the discussion about how to make it architecturally compatible.
Okay. For the sake of an idea, okay, let's just explore a little bit. Could someone come to the city and say, okay, I want to buy this 20-foot container, and I want to change the look completely? In other words, they would get a permit from the building department, and they would submit plans to you as to what this would look like when they were done with it.
Under the code as proposed, the answer is no.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Now, if you wanted to make that suggestion, you certainly could, but under the proposed code, the answer is no.
Is this just within the city limits?
This meets the same requirements as do the pods that many people in the community use for the temporary storage.
Right,
as they
the
move.
pods we would consider temporary storage, and those would be the ones that are permitted to have a maximum size for 30, and they're allowed to be there for 30 days.
But the
This
same
does not impact pods at all.
Right, what I'm saying here is the containers meets the same time requirements as with the pods, the 30-day, as it stands
You can have a pod for 30 days. It's temporary. As soon as you come in and get a building permit and want to make it permanent, then this ordinance would not allow that.
Okay. The only thing that I have to start thinking about is, say you had a container that you just wanted to redo and make it conforming. I can see where this container, your project for the container would probably cost more than if you went out and bought a shed, okay, that was already conforming.
Absolutely, but at that point, it should be up to that individual person. It
And let
shouldn't
me
be
tell
up
you
to the
why
city
staff-
to make such a severe ban.
And let me tell you why staff would find this a problem. You're asking staff to decide if it looks good enough, because you are saying, is that architecturally compatible? Now, the people in this room may be able to agree with that for one picture, but you're asking staff to do that repeatedly. And at some point, I promise you, that decision will be made that it is not architecturally compatible enough. And then the city really could be into a situation where there is a lawsuit. So what we're trying to do is to keep this question from coming up repeatedly. And the easiest way we know to do that is to say, we're not going to have them. Now, your suggestion, if you want this to be permitted in the future, and it can be architecturally compatible or it can be determined not to be seen from whatever, we need very specific criteria, because as you've already heard, the Board of Adjustment said if it's on a 2-acre lot, all architectural compatibility means is you have to have a painted, but the same gentleman said that's not good enough on a 1/4-acre lot. So what you're doing, if you have that gray area, is we can probably have this conversation once a month for the rest of our natural lives, because nobody's going to agree what architectural compatible is on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Do we have any more cards on? Okay. Oh. Cool.
Robert McCandless.
Good evening. My name is Robert McCandless. I live at 4905 St. George's Avenue in the Abbeywood subdivision. We're right next door to Cathedral Estates. And Tom, this ordinance here for shipping containers, I'm against, because we do not need shipping containers in residential areas, period. There is nothing here that I've heard so far as a minimum size lot to put one on. My lot, which is one of the bigger lots in our sub, is 85 by 105. The average is 60 by 105. If somebody wanted to rent a crane and try to put one back there, nah, that's not going to work. You know, we need to keep this shipping containers where they belong in shipping areas. Thank you.
How large of a shed could someone build on that lot?
Pardon?
How large of a shed would someone be allowed to build on one of those lots?
On our lots?
Mm-hmm. You're saying the shipping container is too large for the
Yes.
lot size. So I'm asking, if someone wanted to build a shed or buy one of these sheds, how large of a shed would they be allowed?
It has to be unseen from the street and behind the house.
But there's no size restriction?
No.
So, but I thought your objection to the shipping container was size.
Yeah.
But anybody can build as big of a shed as they want to.
No, I don't think so. Not that big.
They have to have
Has to be unseen. Has to be unseen
But
from
the
the
shipping
street.
container has to
Right.
go with the setbacks. I'm just trying to figure out what the difference is
Yeah.
between a shed and a shipping container.
Well, it has to be architecturally compatible too.
The shed.
Yeah.
And it,
I think the difference in his case, right, is he can't see from the audience.
Yeah, it has to be architecturally compatible. It's not something that can just be thrown up.
So is it, I'm sorry, are there definitions or guidelines for architecturally compatible for a shed?
On the bottom of page 5 of the ordinance, you see a definition for shipping container that's proposed.
For a shed?
No, there's not. What the code says is that if the shed is greater than 20% of the primary size of the primary use, it has to be architecturally compatible.
But is that defined?
No,
your
it is
problem
not.
Before was
The only
we can't define that for this.
Well, we can, but we don't have one in the code currently.
Okay.
The only determination we could find is the one example you've already heard about on the 2-acre property where it was determined to be
For a
architect-
shed? I'm
Well,
talking about for a shed.
No,
If I wanted to build a
understand,
shed.
but
Okay.
that is still the only thing that we have where there's been an architectural compatible discussion at the Board of Adjustment that we're aware of. So no, the staff struggles with this every time somebody comes in with the big shed.
Okay, so no difference? No difference if they wanted to build a shed or if they wanted to put a shipping container, you're still going to have to struggle with what is architecturally compliant
If
mean.
the shed is 20% of the size, yes, ma'am, you're right.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just saying, couldn't they just all follow the same rules?
If there were rules,
I'm saying, couldn't the shipping container just follow the shed rules?
if we modified that in such a way, but I still would like more definition than just pitch roof. Can it be a 12 by 12?
I don't disagree with you.
Right. So if we're going to go that direction, then we would like very specific so that there's not a lot of opportunity to be arguing about this in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming that this is what we're talking about in terms of aesthetics for a shed. Who's going to determine that? I mean, who's
That's what we're talking about, right?
Exactly. That's what we're talking about.
That's right.
Who's going to sit back and determine this shape with barn shape or sloping roof shape or hip roof shape or
Right.
So it's not as simple as one
No, it's not.
would make it out to be.
Now, you
But that's
could
an existing problem.
It is. That is correct. The good news is there aren't too many of them, but it is possible, I suppose, that you could say it must be made of exactly the same material. It must have the same roof color. I mean, you can go through it must have windows on it. You can do a lot of things because these sheds generally, a lot of them do have windows if they're a certain size, but if it's a 10 by 10 shed, they're usually just a box.
Margaret Sizemore?
Sir, the majority of the people here. The majority of the people here that are opposed to this as it's written have requested that either Sean or I speak on their behalf, and we pretty much covered most of what we need to. There was only one other thing that deals with our particular case, if you were interested in hearing it. Okay, this particular shipping container was brought in on a Saturday afternoon. So it was put there illegally. I notified code enforcement the following Monday. They came out, they cited it. The property owner went to the building department, and on the 27th, they gave him a permit. You got two opposing things here. Being permitted under one section of the code and being cited under the correct section of the code. So, like I said, we're trying to reach a compromise. If we can work this out, and we can go with this 6 months, not 3 years, to get this architecturally compatible, put the siding on it, put a roof on it, then we're done with it, as far as we're concerned. Thank you.
You're not supposed to be doing that.
I'll say to the chair.
That's how the rules work.
That he need to determine whether or not he speaks with the people. Right.
Is your microphone on?
Whether or not he speaks for the people.
I understood him that he
Would
did
have the
represent.
opportunity to speak.
Yeah. I understood he did represent.
And nobody is opposing him. If there were somebody here that he's not speaking for, then they would oppose. What
Well, we have to go through that. Do we have any more? Do we have any more cards?
Yes. Mitzi Vitucci?
I currently rent a...
State your name
Oh,
and
I'm sorry.
address.
Mitzi Vitucci, 2815 St. Charles Court. I'm in the same neighborhoods, Cathedral Pines Estates. But I currently rent a 10 by 10 storage unit, but it's air conditioned. So I don't know if you took that into consideration, that when it's air conditioned, you pay more per month than, okay. And, but I also think the 3 years is excessive. And then I also feel that the city, you had asked a question about the size of sheds according to the lots. Yeah, according to the city, there is no restriction. And I feel that that's something that should be, that the size of a storage unit, a shed, should go by according to the size of your lot, so that it's not blocking anybody's, view, another house, another neighbor. So, and I don't think the city currently has any restrictions on size. And I'm with you, I have trouble finding what the difference is between a shed and a storage container. Thank you.
Mike Ball?
Tom speaks for me, so he supports my move, and I'll give him 1 minute if he needs it.
Ann Ball?
The same. Tom has permission to speak for me.
So I do have one more comment I'd like to make, if I could take Tom's time. So we kind of got into a little bit of the discussion that the young lady brought up about architecturally consistent. And I understand that's difficult. I mean, we even struggle with it in the neighborhood and the homeowner association for other types of upgrades that people want to go do, because times change, people change, tastes change. So it is a struggle. But I think the reason why, when you're comparing a shed to shipping containers and making the argument that a shed's roof is taller than a 6-foot fence, which it is, but the reason why we don't struggle with that in the neighborhood is because when you go buy a shed or have a prefab shed or go build a shed or bring the plans to the city to approve, a pitched roof on a shed with some sort of siding that's painted is relatively within the definition of architecturally consistent. It may not fit all the time behind a 6-foot fence because they are pitched roofs, but people sell sheds and design sheds to already be architecturally consistent, to not have these arguments. If people began to design sheds that look like shipping containers, we'd be back having the same discussion, because sheds would actually be looking like shipping containers. So I just think it's kind of already precluded by the designs and the normal definition of a shed that most people would bring before the city and say, hey, that's architecturally consistent.
Also, I think when you purchase a shed from, Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, they're already constructed to a point where they're aesthetically pleasing. They're made to look aesthetically pleasing. You bring in a shipping container, right off the bat, it's not aesthetically pleasing. So then you've got a job as the building department to, like you said, to bring that into compliance, whatever that's going to be or will be or whatever. Whereas when you buy a shed, it's already going to be aesthetically pleasing. So I think the fact that a shipping container is just unsightly from the get-go.
I'd like to add to that. I think if we were to consider shipping containers in a residential neighborhood, and we want to have some architectural conformity, I would say that if we were going to consider that as a commission, then what I would suggest is that someone apply for a permit. They bring the drawings to the city of how this is going to look.
Sorry, point of order. Could you close the public discussion?
I'm sorry. I wanted to address.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask staff if that could be done. If you could, in fact, say I want a shipping container, and someone goes through, or maybe they're an architect, maybe they're used to doing this, and they're architects themselves, and they bring plans to you. This is what this container is going to look like when I'm finished with it, and it's going to be attractive. This is my drawing. This is my rendering. What would staff think of something like that? And instead of having someone get the container and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, because we have no idea what it's going to look like by the time they get finished with it.
Well, that's what we would require as part of the permit, that they would show us what they were doing so that we could agree that that was going to meet the requirements of the code. We would not have them make the improvements and then go back and say, where that's not good enough. I mean, we try not to do the old give me a rock kind of thing.
But you're
Right.
talking still about the 3, and I think you're talking about in the future. Or are you just talking about the 3?
It doesn't really matter. The point is architectural requirements
Point of order.
would be looked at first.
We need to hear the public, and then close to the public, and then we'll have some discussion among us.
Gail Murphy. Sandra Furstrom. That's all the cards.
Thank you.
Okay, you can close.
So now we can close this to the public, and we can go back to staff. In terms of what would that requirement be exactly? What would be the standard if someone were to come to you with a container, with drawings, how is that process? What would be the process of that?
They would come in with a rendering. We have criteria as it's proposed that says, does it have a pitched roof? Does it have siding? And is the paint color consistent? Now, if you want to suggest other criteria, then please do so, but that's how it is proposed today.
Do we have that option available now?
Yes, sir. All the options are on the table.
I mean, is it in the code now? Is it in the code now that they could do that?
I'm not sure what it is, but I'll tell you what is in the code. It is in the code that if you have a shed which is greater than 20% in size of the primary structure, it must be architecturally compatible. There is no further definition or standard in the code currently.
Okay, so anything less than that would not have any
That is correct.
standards. Okay, thank you.
Chair, when you speak of compatibility, you're saying compatible to what exists in that particular subdivision?
No, sir, we're saying what's compatible with the primary structure on that lot.
Well, I think we're saying the same thing, aren't we?
Well, maybe. I mean, some communities have varying types of architecture in them. Some communities have one type of architecture. So we would tie it to the principal structure on that lot.
Do we have any more questions? Any more cards? Any questions from?
I don't have a question. I have a comment. I mean, it seems like if there are regulations about sizes of sheds and what that means as far as what the shed looks like, if these shipping containers are very large and will typically exceed the maximum of the shed rule, then it makes sense to me to just apply the same rule that says it has to be architecturally compatible. If an HOA wants to further restrict what happens in their neighborhood, then you have the ability to do that with the bylaws of your HOA. So I think we need to be careful because it does very much seem like we're trying to change a rule for the entire city that really is directed to one area that has an HOA. But I don't know, I mean, if your statements about if you buy a new shed, but if you build a shed, it's not necessarily going to look that great. And if you buy a used shed, you could have the same problem. You could further say that the shipping container had to be less than a certain age. Therefore, you're not, buying the one that's been across the ocean 20 times and, leaks like a sieve. So I think there are other things to do without doing, a complete ban if the true issue is size and look. So that's what I would say.
Any more comments? Seeing no more, do we have a motion on this? I'll open it up for.
I think I agree that the 3-year term is excessive. If the shipping container has to be brought into architectural design within 6 months, it seems like the 6-month period would be sufficient to remove it. And you're talking about getting their money out of the unit. They can still sell the unit and recoup some of their money. So I would think the 6 month to bring it into conformity or the architectural design and sell it or get rid of it within the 6 month period. I think 6 months was sufficient. I mean, to determine where the things that are in the unit can go. I think beyond that, I don't see any reason to extend it beyond the 6 month period. That's my thoughts on that.
Any more? Okay, so we seem to reach the point here. I tell you, I would like to read the ordinance to everyone as presented by the city. And that's ordinance number 44-2017. I'm going to read the whole thing so everybody understands where we are. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to read the ordinance that is presented as it's written. An ordinance of the City of Titusville, Florida, amending the Code of Ordinances relating to shipping containers by amending Chapter 28, zoning, specifically amending Section 28-357, detached accessory building structure, and Section 28-365, parking or storage of motor vehicles, recreational vehicles, boats, airboats, or trailers in residential districts to prohibit shipping containers, as with residentially zoned or used properties, specifically amending Section 28-373, temporary storage units relating to shipping containers, and renumbering subsequently sections, amending Chapter 34 procedures, specifically creating Section 34-353, non-conforming structure shipping containers, and renumerating subsequent sections, amending Chapter 37 definitions to add the definition of shipping container, provided for severability, repeal of conflicting ordinances, and the effective date into the code. And basically what that says is that shipping containers would be prohibited on the property in residential. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's the way it's advertised.
Okay. So I'll be frank with you. We've had discussions like this in the past with different structures. And we always come back to the complicated issue of standards for these structures, what they look like and what they're going to serve and what potential hazards, so to speak, with using these structures on a property. And you also have to be concerned about your neighbors, where this container or shed is going to be used. You want things to be aesthetically pleasing, at least most of us do. Now, there are some who don't care, but I think most homeowners do care, especially within the city limits. So I think we should take that into account when we're looking at this type of thing. Because if you, personally speaking, I've seen people try to make things look attractive and try to conform, and lots of times these projects go halfway through and it creates all kinds of problems because they don't conform. And basically, this is what I've seen in the past with some of these projects. So that's just my opinion, and I'll open it up for consideration to the commission here for further comment. Are we ready for a vote on this?
I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance number XX-2017, limiting the term, once the ordinance is passed, to 6 months.
Do I have a second? We don't have a second.
I will second.
We have a second. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Vice Chairman Shavir,
Yes.
Member Ritchie,
Yes.
Dr. Faison,
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland.
No.
So we have a majority on that.
Okay, we'll have to.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So the motion passes. And for those of you who want to pursue this further, you can go to City Council, the next council meeting, and you can bring your cause and your issues to them, and they will further look at this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the questions reported in the negative, perhaps.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you do. I'm sorry. You voted no, so would you please state your reason?
It's as I said, I think that there's a way to make this in concert with the shed rules, rather than having a separate rule that says nothing, these can never be allowed. I do think it's very restrictive, and I think there's a way to do it that's not quite so restrictive.
Thank you.
If I could, I just want to clarify that the motion said that you either have to remove the container in 6 months, make it architecturally compatible, or hide it from view. Thank you.
That's correct. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. The next item is a comprehensive plan amendment, which is proposing to increase the amount of the maximum dwelling units from 20 units per acre to 30 units per acre. And our redevelopment planner, Tim Ford, has been sitting here, and he wants to present this item, so I'm going to move.
This is a comprehensive plan amendment proposing to amend policy 1.21.1 of the future land use element by changing the maximum residential density from 20 dwelling units per acre to 30 dwelling units per acre within the downtown mixed-use land use designation downtown subdistrict. And it also proposes to amend section of the zoning code, section 28234, downtown mixed-use smart code intensity and dimensional standards, density downtown subdistrict from 20 units per acre to 30 units per acre in the zoning chapter of the city's land development code. This new comprehensive plan policy and zoning text amendment will implement a recommended land development regulation amendment of the city of Titusville's. This is on page 21 of 65. This is a staff report. This text amendment and the land use amendment will implement a recommended land use development regulation amendment of the City of Titusville Economic Strategic Plan, which the City Council adopted on January 24th, 2017. And on October 25th, 2017, the City Council approved advisability to amend the land development regulations and the future land use element to permit greater density in the DMU downtown subdistrict. And then the CRA approved this recommendation at their November meeting. Analysis: when the downtown mixed-use zoning district was established, several guiding principles for the district were established. These included appropriate densities to create a viable, thriving urban center. In addition, the downtown subdistrict is described as consisting of higher density mixed-use buildings. The city's economic development plan recommends higher densities within the downtown area to encourage redevelopment. And then we have attached those pages from that economic development report. So in contrast to encouraging higher densities in the downtown, the future land use element and the zoning district standards are the same throughout the downtown. And the economic development plan state currently the density of 20 units per acre does not encourage residential development, and even if it did, residential development of 20 units per acre will not promote a mixed-use, active environment downtown. We believe that the amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and that the recommendation is the staff recommends that the board recommend approval to City Council regarding the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and land development reg, and transmit it to the state's land planning agency. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
I'll turn this over to, do we have any cards on this?
Yes. Sierra Taylor.
Well, Mr. Butler.
Hi, my name is Sierra Taylor. I represent Red Canyon Software and LaunchNow. They're the new owners of the buildings that are on the corner of Main Street and US 1 or Washington, the old bank and Walker Hotel. And this amendment is very critical to the success of their project because the current plan does not allow enough units per acre for their redevelopment of their project. So that's why we're in support of this, and we're very appreciative for you hearing it, and thank you very much.
You represent
Red Canyon Software from Denver, Colorado, and their limited liability corporation is called LaunchNow, which is just those two buildings, the bank and the Walker Hotel. And that's where currently downstairs on the bottom floor is retail, and their plan is to change the upstairs, not change, but restore the upstairs back into apartments as it historically was.
I'm excited about that.
Me too.
Yes?
You want to elaborate a little bit more?
Well, I have a question about where's the downtown sub-district?
If you look on,
There's on the colored page.
on
the
25-65 there,
Right.
the colored page, basically from Garden Street down to South Street, that sort of magenta colored, purplish color.
So it's the whole pink area, not
The pinky-
just the downtown area?
Correct. That would just that portion of the downtown. The areas north of Garden Street would not be included. The yellow area and the area south of South Street would not be included.
So are you talking? This here.
So basically around City Hall. Or I guess the hatched area is one of the historic, the
Yeah, I
historic
wondered
commercial
if it was just
district.
the hatched
So
area or the whole pink area.
it would be the whole pink area.
Okay, so that would open this whole area up to like apartment buildings potentially?
Or mixed-use buildings, which is the problem like we're seeing with the launch now.
No, that one I absolutely understand.
You
I
know,
was just
they're trying to restore it to what it
Mhm.
historically was, and under today's rules, they can't.
Understood. But the size of this area being not just the downtown historic district, I'm just asking, would it open this entire pink area up to apartment buildings and things like that that are very high density?
The density would be the additional 10 units, the 30 instead of the 20.
Okay.
Which we think would encourage more mixed use.
I'm curious about it sounds reasonable when you obviously you need people to make a business successful. You have to increase your densities to a certain point in order for people to gravitate and be there permanently and be there to encourage businesses to succeed. And the way it is structured now, how are you going to encourage new development? I mean, how is this going to work with the structures that we already have in the city? How are you going to increase that density to 30 units per acre?
again, it's based on the size of the properties, but what it allows is such, as a prime example, is those buildings that Launch Now is talking about. They had 20 units upstairs on their second and third floors. They cannot put those 20 units back because the density is restricting it, that they can't even fill up to their third floor. So it's not inducive to developers to come in and put residences above commercial units to make it feasible. So even at 30 units, that is probably even kind of low. But we think it's enough that will at least get us historically back to where we were.
How many lots, how much space is available actually for development at the present time? I mean, do we know offhand how we would?
Not off the top of my head, but basically every lot can be redeveloped. So it's basically, any of the properties in the downtown.
So do you think, would you have to go up necessarily?
No, we're not proposing to go up. I mean, we're not proposing any height changes. It's going to stay at the same height limits of the downtown. It would just allow a greater number of units to be built, per acre. So it gives them a few additional units to be added that we think would get them over the threshold to make it financially feasible. We have not really. This is the first real residential mixed-use project coming into the city. And I think others will have the same problem if we don't increase the density. There's no incentive for people to add residences to the commercial.
Thank you, Dr. Pace.
The CRA board, who composed the CRA board?
The CRA board is composed of 5 city council people plus 2 appointees who have some type of relationship to the downtown area. And so that's the composition of that board.
And it has gone before the CRA board?
It went before the CRA board let's see, I think it was November 14th. Unanimously, CRA unanimously recommended approval of the change at their November 14th, 2017 meeting.
And we're going to make recommendation to the city council, who sits on the CRA board.
Yes. Technically, they are 2 separate entities legally.
I understand where we are, and I just don't want to waste my time. Is the point I wish to make at this point. We've had chance to read this, I'm sure, all of us, and it has come through us. And if I would be in order, out of order, wherever I am, but I'd like to recommend approval.
Second. Do we have any other comments? Okay. But then we'll go for a vote. All of those. Can we have a roll call, please?
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
The motion passes. Okay, next. The next item on the agenda is ordinance number XX 2017, extending the moratorium on medical marijuana dispensaries.
Yes, you've seen this will be the second extension of the medical marijuana ordinance moratorium. Let me explain how we got here. In November of 2016, Florida voters approved the constitutional amendment to allowing medical marijuana. At that time, the council needed some additional input that was required under this amendment, that the legislature would provide some rules for which dispensaries would be put in. So the moratorium was put in to allow those rules to be promulgated. The legislature met in regular session and did not take up that issue. So at that point, there were still no understanding of the rules that were supposed to be promulgated, and the moratorium was extended to a second time. When that came about, the legislature happened to go into special session, and during the special session, they passed Senate Bill 8A, which limits the ability of local government to deal with dispensaries. They have two options. The first is they can ban them outright, and the second is that they can treat all pharmacies as well as medical marijuana dispensaries in the same fashion for locational criteria, except for one item, and that is that medical marijuana dispensaries must be at least 500 feet from a primary and secondary school. It does not discuss daycare centers. It doesn't discuss parks. It just says those two items. The council, as many councils throughout the state, have really been dealing with the fact that they have such a limited number of options. And so in dealing with this issue, there was a consideration that the legislature may, in the 2018 session, deal with this issue again to give some cities some additional flexibility. And that was the intent of extending this moratorium that you see before you. Last week, we were told that it is unlikely that the legislature is going to consider that in their 2018 session. So that means that we need some kind of regulations on the books relating to this. Now, the council has not yet given staff direction to do that. What staff is proposing is that this moratorium be extended, and on Tuesday night, we are requesting the council to provide direction as to which of the two options they have they want to choose. Whatever they decide, we're suggesting that the ordinance implementing that option would also at that time suspend and cease this moratorium. But it will take us a while to do whatever it is that council decides they want done. Because if they say they need to ban it, then we need to write an ordinance specifically saying in the code so that there's no question it is banned. If, on the other hand, they want to allow them to be regulated in the same way as pharmacies are currently regulated, then we will also have to amend the code to specifically say that in all of those zoning districts, dispensaries are permitted, except for the 500-foot distance, which is required by state law.
No.
Are you saying that we can't have a more restrictive, like we can't add and daycare centers and parks?
We can add and daycare centers and parks, but that also means that all CVS, all Publix that have a pharmacy, all private pharmacies would have to meet those requirements. It also means that all existing pharmacies have the potential to be non-conforming.
They don't grandfather?
No.
What is the present distance requirement?
For what?
500 feet
The
from
liquor stores, I guess.
liquor stores must be 500 feet away from schools and churches.
Now, would the marijuana situation be
dispensaries?
Meet the same?
No, sir. The statute, the Senate Bill 8A did not discuss anything except 500 feet from primary and secondary schools. It did not mention parks. It did not mention churches. It did not mention daycare centers. It listed those two types of schools.
Well, how does that meet with what we have presently with alcoholic beverages?
Alcoholic beverages must be 500 feet away from churches, daycare centers, and schools. So you would be more restrictive to alcohol than you would be to a dispensary.
So whatever restrictions you're putting on the dispensaries would be applied to the pharmacies as well.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
What if, just for sake of argument, what if if we voted down the temporary moratorium? What would happen if city council voted it down? How much time do you have to do what you need to do?
The moratorium expires in early January.
You'd have to move quick, wouldn't you?
It is impossible for us to advertise that and have it anything be adopted by, I believe it's January 5th.
It is January 5th, as it's stated in the whereas of this ordinance, and the staff is unable to create something in that time frame that would protect the city, in our opinion, because of only having one council meeting in December and advertising requirements. We want to draft the ordinance that council directs us to prepare, and we haven't received a direction in order to do so. And so this moratorium is needed to stop the gap of having a time period where we would not have a moratorium in place. This commission has approved previous moratoriums because the direction from council hasn't been provided, and it would be consistent with your previous decisions to extend the moratorium to allow staff to craft an ordinance that reflects council's decision.
How long does if we approve the moratorium, how long does that extend it to?
It would be 180 days, but if it is staff's intent to move as quickly as we can to implement council's direction.
Okay, once they give direction, who all is responsible for determining?
Well, if council were to say we're going to ban this permanently, which about approximately 50% of the other communities in the county have done, then we would be able to have that ordinance written and advertised, and I'm saying probably beginning of March.
And if they didn't ban it?
If they said that you just need to permit it in all of the existing classifications, that would be about the same time frame. Now, just so you are aware, the city of Palm Bay has already had a dispensary open. Orange County has 2 dispensaries, and the city of Satellite Beach also permits a dispensary.
They only allow 1 dispensary in Satellite Beach?
Well, no, they allow dispensaries, I'm sorry, but it's unlikely that people would want to locate more than 1 in a community that size. But, right. And so you understand, the medical marijuana can be delivered. I don't know if there's an extra charge. My assumption would be there would be. And also, you are permitted to get a 70-day, the prescription is for 70 days.
Supply?
Yes.
Oh.
And that supply is determined, of course, by the physician.
Okay.
So if you can't get it in Titusville, you can go down to Satellite.
I don't know that one's going to open there. I know that the city of Satellite Beach has said that they would permit that.
Well, and there's already one open in Orlando that delivers to Brevard County.
Okay, and
so
I'm aware.
You can already get it.
Right.
I know people that already get it.
I just wanted to bring up the questions about, is it the same as the liquor, the bars and stuff? I mean, this is not recreational marijuana that we're talking about. This is medical marijuana, and therefore the legislation from Tallahassee is that it would follow pharmacy regulations, because that's one of the options.
Yes, ma'am, except for I just want to make sure that you understand pharmacy regulations except for the 500.
Understood,
yes,
but I'm just saying it is geared to the pharmacy regulations, not to liquor establishments, because this is not a recreational situation. This is a doctor-prescribed
Yes, ma'am. I
medication.
believe that was the intent, I
That-
believe, of the legislature was actually to allow more of these.
Right.
But when local governments saw that they had so little flexibility, many of them said, we're just not comfortable.
Right.
And I don't believe that the legislature intended that. I think they intended to make it easier, and it's turned out to be a little harder.
Do you have any cards on this?
No, sir.
So with that, do we have a motion?
So I just want to make sure I understand. We're voting to either extend it for 180 days or not to extend it. That's
Yes,
the
yes,
choice
ma'am,
here.
that's
Okay.
correct.
But it really isn't a choice, right?
Well, there's not a lot of flexibility here, because any way you look at it, it's going to take time to follow what the council is going to tell us to do.
Well, I'll make a motion to,
Let me just backpedal a little bit. We're going to open this to the public. Any comments from the public? Yes, ma'am. Come on up, please. State your name, please.
My name's Gail Murphy. I live at 2270 St. Andrews in Titusville. I don't really know what to put into words for you to be more comfortable passing this. I'm not really sure what people are afraid of when it comes to medical marijuana. I see a lot of people, really plus, minus this and that, but bottom line is it's a medical product. It should be treated like a medical product. It's not alcohol. It's not for recreation. Give these people a break. Do they have to go, so far away to get their prescriptions filled? It makes no sense to me. I mean, it's commerce, if nothing else. It's good for the city. Don't be one of those that says no.
Yeah, and that's why I asked the question. This isn't, what we're voting on is not whether to allow it or not. We're
Yeah,
just voting
I
on whether or
understand.
not we're extending the moratorium.
That's
That's what I wanted, that's why I asked my question.
Thank you. Okay, we'll close it to the public. And what's the desire of the commission?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number XX-2017, extending the moratorium on medical marijuana dispensaries.
Is there a second?
Second.
Will we have a roll call, please?
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
No.
And the motion passes.
If I could just ask the commission members to move their microphones a bit closer to your mouths. The audio tech is having problems hearing some of the speakers, and I want to make sure everyone is heard.
Thank you. Dr. Faison voted no. Dr. Faison, you have your...
I just don't want to make it more difficult for those who need by extending a moratorium for 180 days.
Thank you. And the motion passes. And next on the agenda, your packet.
Okay. I think we've gotten to the easy part of the agenda. This is an easement vacation. The petitioner, Mr. Roy Floss, has requested to vacate a portion of a public utility easement located on the east side of a single-family lot located at 43 Linwood Avenue. The requested easement is to allow the installation of a shed, which I'm sure will be architecturally compatible, and that the proposed shed will encroach approximately 10 feet into a 15-foot public utility easement. The applicant is requesting a vacation of approximately 950 square feet. The city gas, Florida Power and Light, AT&T, Spectrum, the City of Titusville Water Resources, and the City of Titusville Public Works has no objection.
Thank you. I'll open this up to the commission. I'll open this up to the public. Do we have any cards on this?
Mr. Floss is here.
Come on up.
He's here if you have any questions for him.
Do you have any comment at all? No? Okay, thank you.
if
I would
the,
offer a motion to approve the,
Hold on. I'm sorry.
I would offer a motion to approve the easement request as presented.
I'll second.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
All right, we're on a roll. The next one is also an easement vacation, and this is for to vacate two public utility easements. The first is a 25-foot public utility easement along the north property line, and the second is a 10-foot utility easement along the eastern property line. This property is on the northeast corner of State Road 50 and State Road 405. The property is sometimes called the Wedge property. The proposal is to develop this site, and what they want to do is to take these easements and be vacated. Then when they put the utilities in, they will dedicate new easements to the city in the proper location. Again, all of the agencies that review this have had an opportunity to do so, and there are no objections.
Thank you. We'll turn it back to the commission. We'll open this to the public. Close it to the public. What's the commission's desire on this?
I vote to approve easement vacation number 3-2017.
Second.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes. Any idea what they're going to put there?
We have been told that it will be a Cumberland Farms, and I think they're also considering a tire store and a third store. Of course, until we actually see the permit with the names on it, we are not sure.
No restaurants.
Oh, there'll be a third. There'll be a third place, so that's possible that there would be a restaurant there, but we don't know. The next item is easement vacation for 2017 for property located at 1630 North Eden Circle. This is a request to vacate one public utility easement and one portion of a drainage easement. And the applicant is requesting this vacation in order to accommodate a swimming pool in the rear yard. There, again, all of the agencies that I listed before have had the opportunity to review this, and there are no objections to this proposed vacation.
Thank you. I'll turn it back. Open to the public, close the public.
I'm the one that asked for it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I'll turn it back to the commission. What's the commission's desire on this?
Seeing no suppliers objecting to it, I would offer a motion that we approve.
I'll second.
We have a roll call, please?
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now, this next item is one in which the area of critical concern is an overlay that was designated in 1988, and it requires limitations on development in order to protect the city's well field and aquifer recharge areas. Currently, if you construct a subdivision in the area of critical concern, you're required to have a minimum of 10,000 square feet subdivision. If you look on page 57 of your package, I think you would see what a typical subdivision would look like. You can see roads with wall-to-wall lots. The staff has suggested that there may be a better way to develop within the area of critical concern, and that option is a conservation subdivision shown on page 56. What that would allow is the same number of units, but smaller lots. And the reason that this is advantageous for the area of critical concern is because there is less disruption to the aquifer recharge and any vegetation that's on that property. So it's an advantageous to the environmental and the aquifer protection. The person who's developing this would probably prefer it for two reasons. It's less expensive to develop. There's less roadway to put in and that kind of thing. And secondly, the market has been smaller lots. People are getting to the point where they enjoy having a backyard, but they want the homeowners association to manage it and cut it and not to have to worry about that. So we see this as an opportunity to preserve more native areas, our well fields and our aquifer recharge, while allowing development that is more like the type that people are more interested in these days. And that's the intent of the ordinance. One other item, the open space conservation subdivision requirement is a 50%. So 50% of this property would be left essentially in its natural state.
Thank you. We open this to the public, close to the public, and we'll turn it back over to the commission.
I'll make a motion to pass.
I'm sorry.
I had a question. Does this mean that that they wouldn't completely strip this? They would have to leave this while they built? Or does this mean that they can only build the lots these sizes, but they're going to strip it while they do it and then have to regrow it?
No, ma'am. The intent is that they keep it in its natural state.
And is that clear that they have to only clear the lots that are going to be lots? And that, I mean, it's easier for them just to come in and strip everything and then build the lots.
Well,
And then
actually,
say
it's
they're gonna
very
regrow,
expensive
right?
to do that because you have to pay somebody to go in there with a tractor and do all that. Then you have to dispose of it. So if they can leave it alone, they will. I know that it sounds a little difficult to believe.
Well,
but
no, I just think it's easier for them to get all their heavy equipment and all that in if there's not all this stuff they've got to get around.
But we don't allow them to remove.
Okay, that was my question.
We don't allow them to remove the fill, even in the event that they move it or that they disrupt it. They have to keep the fill on the property. So it becomes a very expensive operation if you're not allowed to take the fill off the property. There's really no point in disturbing that any more than they have to because they're not allowed to take the fill and move it off the property anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. We have any comments from staff on this one? No. I like this a lot. Looking at the two different plans, it's amazing when you look at this, the difference between the two. And I really wish there was some way where we could just have all the developments look like this. Because I'm going to comment on this, that development there on Park Avenue and Knox McRae. I live right there. And I have to tell you, they cleared the whole thing. There's just very, very little left of the natural vegetation that was in there. And I'm guessing that the drainage was a problem there. I think a lot of that was swampy. I'm just guessing that they had to fill in just about every...
That's right. And then we required compensatory storage. So they had to remove trees in order to keep compensatory storage.
Yeah.
So it was a difficult site to develop.
Yeah, and I just hope it looks okay. I'm sure it will when they're done with it, but it's just disturbing of the wildlife that was there is incredible. So there was a lot going on there. And I drive by there every day. It's like, but anyway, what's the commission's desire on this?
I'll make a motion to pass ordinance number XX-2017 relating to conservation subdivisions in the areas of critical concern.
Second.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Motion passes.
And our last item is a ordinance reinstating dog-friendly dining back into the code where in our code update, in our zeal, we seem to have deleted it unintentionally. And this is consistent with the state statute.
Does this return it exactly to what it was before?
It does, exactly.
So it just undeletes everything we deleted in
The only thing
8
we did
years
was
ago.
change the number so it fits into the code, because we changed all the numbers in the code. But yes, ma'am, we didn't change any words.
For the record, we open this to the public. Seeing none, we'll close it to the public and bring it back to the board.
I can remember when this came through, this particular item, and we beat it pretty well. So I'm going to be the person that say, recommend that we approve the item as submitted.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I have a very short report. First of all, I wanted to let you know that there are no items on the December 20th P&Z agenda, so we're not having a meeting. And the other thing that I want to provide to you is some information that was actually compiled by the school board, but I think you would find it to be interesting. It has to do with the number of building permits that have been issued by various communities. And I'm sorry. Yes. And I just wanted to let you, every year communities provide this information, and it's part of the way that schools look at what they project as far as the number of students that are going to be put into schools. But I thought you would be interested to see that several communities, even communities that are larger than Titusville, actually had a reduction in the number of residential developments between 2017 and 2016. And you can see that by the negative numbers. Titusville had a significant increase in that number. And I think if you think about the fact that Palm Bay had 175 additional units and they have about 100,000 people in them, and we had 107 and we have less than 50,000, you can see that Titusville is doing quite well when it comes to residential development.
Mr. Shavir, I have a report.
Oh, reports, please.
Just on the side, Mr. Lindmo was a little worried after the last one, and so he says to me today, thanks for touching base with your next meeting. Anything on the agenda that is residential? And I told him no. So what he has told us has to do with what I had mentioned last time with the attendance boundaries. As for school board report, the attendance boundary change process is coming to an end. The two most controversial areas have been deferred. It has to do with Melbourne High School and Quest Elementary until next year, when we can reanalyze the enrollment statistics and future projections. On December 12th, 2017, the school board agenda will vote to have a public hearing on January 23rd, 2018 to decide on another change recommendation. No, I'm sorry, another recommended attendance boundary change. The summary of all the updated attendance boundary changes can be viewed online, and then he gives me the online sites. If you're interested, I have it. I'll pass it down, and you can go on and look. So that's his report, quick and short.
Nothing.
I just had a question for staff. After the last meeting, one of the citizens' concern was that even if we passed the change in the zoning for that, or what was it, so they couldn't have a warehouse, so, the mixed use changes. And he said, well, nobody's going to develop this anyway. And it got me thinking about it, and I just wanted to ask, when those types of zoning changes occur, how do we communicate to the owners of the properties that are impacted?
In the case of a change like we had in this, we had notified the property owners so they could be involved with it at the beginning. We've kept them involved. In the event that we ever do an administrative rezoning, which is we actually physically change the zoning, that you go from a residential to commercial or something like that, we have to notify the individual property owners of that notice, and there's a lot of...
Yeah, what I'm talking about is 2 weeks ago, we changed the zoning to allow multi-use.
Right.
So are all the owners of the properties that are impacted by that, do they get some kind of notification?
Yes, ma'am, we wrote them. Yes, ma'am, we told them about it.
Okay, that was my question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It absolutely is, but not everybody reads the paper, so we want to make sure that they're aware.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion to adjourn? So moved.
Is Peggy, the December 20th meeting is canceled?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
There is no meeting in December, no second meeting. So we'll see you in January.